February 20, 1943. The skies above Tunisia were a haze of dust and cordite, the ground shaking beneath the thunder of tanks. Inside a German Panzer IV, the air was suffocating, the smell of oil, sweat, and burning powder filling every corner. The commander pressed his throat mic tight against his neck, straining to hear the garbled voice crackling through the radio. Static. Pops. Half a sentence, cut off. Useless. Repeat. Say again, he barked, but the reply was swallowed in the chaos of amplitude modulation. Around him, 5 other panzers lumbered forward, each one blind to the other's movements. Orders traveled by flags, hand signals, or desperate guesses. Coordination was fragile. One wrong turn, one hesitation, and the formation collapsed. Then, out of the smoke, the enemy appeared. 5 American Sherman tanks, scattered across broken terrain, surged forward with uncanny precision. They moved as if choreographed, converging from different directions like the fingers of a clenched fist. Each tank shifted to cover the blind spots of the others. Each crew seemed to know exactly where their comrades were, even though ridgelines and smoke made it impossible to see. To the German commander, it felt impossible. Almost supernatural. No flares. No messengers. No desperate flag signals. Yet the Shermans fought as one organism, every move perfectly timed. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that every single Sherman tank carried something they lacked, the world's first battlefield network. Hidden beneath steel plating and sandbags, weighing just 181 pounds, sat the SCR-508 frequency modulation radio. It didn't just connect one commander to his men. It connected every tank to every other tank, a web of voices, clear as if spoken face to face, cutting through the noise of battle with crystal precision. This invisible advantage would reshape warfare. Armor and guns mattered, yes. But in the end, it was the electromagnetic spectrum that decided victory. The Germans had better tanks. But the Americans had better communication. And that, more than any gun caliber or armor thickness, was the weapon that turned the tide. For German crews, this was a nightmare they couldn't explain. They believed the Americans were undisciplined, poorly trained, soft. But when the Shermans arrived, they didn't fight like amateurs. They fought like a hive mind. When a German tank revealed itself, a Sherman already had its gun aimed. When one Sherman was hit, others instantly shifted to cover. When German artillery fire landed, American tanks vanished into cover, as if warned ahead of time. The truth was simple. The Shermans weren't guessing. They were talking. And for the first time in history, tanks weren't isolated machines of war. They were connected, every crew a part of something bigger. The first time German troops met American armor was in November 1942, during Operation Torch. To veterans of the Afrika Korps, hardened under Rommel's command, the newcomers seemed laughable. Green troops, they sneered. Poorly trained. Soft. The Americans drove Shermans that looked clumsy compared to the sleek Panzer III and IV. But the Germans were about to discover something they couldn't see, and it terrified them more than any cannon or engine. Picture this, the dust of Morocco rising as American tanks roll off their landing craft. Engines rumbling. Treads grinding over sand. Every Sherman carries a secret, a Motorola SCR-508 frequency modulation radio, already tuned, already alive with voices. Red 1, this is Red 2, flank secure. Copy, Red 2. Moving to the ridge. Clear. Calm. Confident. As if the battlefield was a board game and every piece could talk to every other. Meanwhile, German tankers tuned their dials, straining to hear. Only static. Only fragments. Orders cut off mid-sentence. In the time it took for a German commander to figure out where his platoon even was, American Shermans were already moving as a pack, shifting and striking with precision. The difference was invisible, but devastating. German tanks relied on the FUG-5 radio, an amplitude modulation set built on 1930s technology. It worked well enough in theory. In practice, it was a disaster. Static from engines. Interference from sparks. Limited range. And worst of all, not every German tank even had one. A German platoon of 5 tanks might have just 1 or 2 with full transmitters. The rest could only listen. If the command tank went down, the entire unit fought blind. The Americans? Every single Sherman could transmit. Every tank could take command. Even if leaders fell, the unit never lost cohesion. Now fast forward to Tunisia. February 20, 1943, the Battle of Kasserine Pass. The terrain was brutal, broken ridges, gullies, and smoke from artillery turning the battlefield into a maze. German commanders thought the Americans would stumble. Coordination in this chaos seemed impossible without visual signals, but then came the shock. Shermans, separated by miles of rock and dust, advanced as if linked by an invisible thread. One crew warned another of a German ambush. Another called in artillery, its shells arriving within minutes. A third shifted position, perfectly timed to cover its allies. To the Germans, it looked like sorcery. In their own tanks, communication collapsed into confusion. One commander tried to order a retreat, only to realize half his platoon hadn't heard him. Another raised his receiver to his ear, but the only sound was a hiss of static. The battlefield swallowed their voices. The Americans, meanwhile, spoke freely. Their voices cut through the chaos with confidence. Enemy spotted on the ridge, bearing 270. Copy that. Adjusting position. Covering fire inbound. For the first time, German tankers felt something new, helplessness. They had the experience. They had the superior guns. They even won tactically at Kasserine, forcing the Americans back. But something gnawed at them. How did these green troops manage such coordination? How could scattered tanks, fresh off the boat, move with such unity? The answer, though the Germans didn't realize it yet, was hidden inside each Sherman. Radios that turned a collection of tanks into something far more terrifying, a network. The Battle of Kasserine Pass was only the beginning. The Germans laughed at the Sherman once. They would never laugh again. Because the Americans hadn't just brought tanks to war, they had brought the future, the invasion of Sicily. July 10, 1943. Before dawn, Allied ships unleashed their firepower against the coast. Waves of Shermans roll ashore, engines roaring, tracks clanking as they climb the narrow Sicilian roads. The German defenders watch from the high ground. Panzer IVs and Stooges sit hidden among olive groves and stone villages, their barrels pointed at the winding approaches. For German tankers, this was their dream terrain, choke points, ambushes, and angles where a single well-placed shot could stop an entire column. But when the battle began, something felt wrong. As American Shermans wound their way uphill, they weren't blind. Inside each steel turret, voices filled the headphones. Red 3, enemy spotted near the farmhouse. Copy, we'll swing left. Red 4, cover our advance. It was as though the hills themselves whispered warnings. Ambushes that should have destroyed the first tanks were foiled. German gunners fired, hit their targets, but then the surviving Shermans immediately responded, calling in artillery, flanking, coordinating as if they had rehearsed it all. The Germans had no such luxury. A panzer commander peered through smoke and dust, desperate to signal his wingmen. His radio sputtered. Static drowned his words. He reached for a flare gun, primitive, bright, and obvious. By the time the signal fired into the sky, the Shermans had already shifted positions, maneuvering with uncanny precision. A panzer commander peered through smoke and dust, desperate to signal his wingmen. His radio sputtered. Static drowned his words. He reached for a flare gun, primitive, bright, and obvious. By the time the signal fired into the sky, the Shermans had already shifted positions, maneuvering with uncanny precision. Imagine a narrow Italian road, carved into a cliffside. A German Stooge sits at the bend, waiting. Its cannon fires, boom. A Sherman erupts in flame, blocking the road. The German crew cheers. But then, through the smoke, the American voices rise again. Red 6 down. Red 5, pull back. Red 2, flank through the orchard. Red 1, calling artillery strike on grid 42. Within minutes, shells rain down on the Stooges' position. The ambush that should have stalled the column instead becomes a death trap for the Germans. The secret wasn't firepower. It wasn't armor. It was information. Radios turned chaos into coordination. Captured German reports from Sicily and Italy reveal their growing disbelief. One officer wrote, "The enemy operates his armor with a flexibility that suggests foreknowledge. Their units appear to move as one body, though widely dispersed." To the Germans, it seemed like witchcraft. How could tanks separated by ridges, valleys, and villages move with such unity? The truth was bitter. Their fug radios, with crackling AM signals, often failed in the mountains. Whole platoons fought in silence. One German tanker later admitted, "At times we might as well have been deaf and blind." The Americans, however, spoke as if they were sitting together in one room. In the flat deserts of Africa, German superiority could still shine through: bigger guns, veteran crews, superior tactics. But in Italy's twisting roads and broken terrain, that advantage withered. A German tank without coordination was just an isolated predator. A Sherman with a radio was part of a pack. The psychological shift was enormous. German tankers began to fear not the Sherman's gun, but its unseen ally, the voice in every crewman's headset. By late 1943, the laughter was gone. The flying milk bottle had shown its hidden claws. But the true test still lay ahead, in the fields of Normandy, where hundreds of Shermans would move as one, and German commanders would finally realize what they were up against. Dawn breaks over the beaches of Normandy. The sea is red with the glow of tracers, the air filled with the thunder of naval guns. Waves of landing craft slam into the surf, dropping ramps as men charge forward under fire. But behind the infantry, something heavier follows: Sherman tanks, the M4s that soldiers nicknamed Ronsons, Tommy Cookers, even death traps. German commanders on the bluffs laugh bitterly. Their Panzer IVs and Tigers wait inland, confident. To them, the Sherman is a toy. Thin armor. Weak gun. Easy prey. But what they don't see is what lies inside: a voice, a lifeline, a thread binding every Sherman into something far greater than a single tank. For the first time in the war, radios operated on a massive scale. Hundreds of Shermans rolled into Normandy, and every one of them could talk. Not just to each other, but to artillery, infantry, and aircraft. Picture it: a Sherman bogs down in a Norman hedgerow. The commander flips his headset. Blue 2 stuck in the bocage. Need cover fire. Immediately, another tank responds. Copy, covering. Overhead, AP-47 Thunderbolt pilot crackles onto the frequency. Got eyes on enemy armor near the orchard. Roger, marking grid. Fire mission incoming. Within minutes, artillery shells pound the target. The Germans, hidden in camouflage and convinced of their superiority, suddenly find themselves bracketed by invisible hands directing fire from land, sea, and sky. For German tankers, Normandy was a nightmare. Reports tell of Panzers outgunning Shermans in direct duels, yet losing the battle anyway. Why? Because coordination was impossible. German tank units often entered combat with only a handful of working radios. In hedgerow country, line of sight collapsed. Crews fired blindly, unaware of where their allies were. Whole units became scattered, isolated, and vulnerable. A German Tiger crewman later confessed, "We could kill them one by one. But they did not come one by one. They came as if guided by a single hand. That hand was the radio. Imagine a narrow Norman lane, flanked by tall hedgerows. A Tiger lurks ahead, waiting. The first Sherman appears, Boom. A shot tears through it, flames licking skyward. The Germans smile grimly. But before they can reposition, the radios come alive. Blue 3 down. Blue 4, flank left. Copy, artillery inbound on Tiger's position. Within minutes, shells crash down. Smoke fills the lane. A P-47 swoops in, its bombs exploding near the Tiger. The great beast that should have dominated the battlefield is blinded, battered, and hunted, not by superior firepower, but by superior communication. By July 1944, German officers were writing desperate reports. One noted, "The enemy's armor, though technically inferior, achieves superiority through unbroken communication and immediate coordination with artillery and aircraft." For the Wehrmacht, it was a bitter realization: the Sherman's deadliest weapon wasn't its gun. It was the voice in every turret, the unseen web connecting hundreds of tanks into a single war machine. German propaganda had long painted Americans as weak, soft, unfit for war. But in Normandy, German tankers witnessed something devastating: ordinary American crews, many just farm boys or mechanics, using radios to fight like veterans. The myth of German superiority cracked. Radios didn't just win battles, they shattered morale, and yet, the story didn't end in Normandy. As the Allies pushed into France and toward Germany, the radios would prove even more destructive, allowing Shermans to swarm across open plains, outmaneuvering even the mighty Panthers and Tigers in the final battles of Europe. Normandy had bled the Germans. But it was Operation Cobra, the breakout from the hedgerows, that turned the tide. At dawn, the sky above St. Lo thundered. Thousands of American bombers dropped their payloads, turning the German lines into smoking craters. Then, like a dam bursting, hundreds of Shermans surged forward across the plains of France. And here, the radios revealed their true power. Each tank wasn't just a vehicle. It was a node in a vast network. Red 2 advancing, flank clear. Copy. Blue squadron moving to cover. Artillery strike confirmed. Air support 5 minutes out. From Normandy's bocage to the wide-open fields of France, the Shermans didn't fight as individuals. They fought as a swarm. Flexible. Fluid. Unstoppable, German commanders scrambled to respond. Panthers and Tigers were rushed into action, their 75mm and 88mm guns tearing through Shermans in one-on-one fights. On paper, the battlefield should have belonged to the Wehrmacht. But war is not fought on paper. A Tiger might destroy 2, 3, even 4 Shermans, but the survivors would call in reinforcements within minutes. Artillery zeroed in on the Tiger's position. P-47 Thunderbolts swooped from the sky, their rockets screaming down. Infantry closed in with bazookas. German tankers described the nightmare. "We killed them, but more always came. Their movements were too fast, too coordinated. It was as if we fought not tanks, but a single organism." The organism was the American radio net. Picture the chaos of the Falaise pocket. German forces trapped, trying desperately to retreat east. Smoke, dust, and fire choked the air. Amid the confusion, Shermans advance relentlessly, cutting off escape routes. Inside one tank, the commander hears the call. Enemy column retreating along the main road. Coordinates 55 to 82. Roger. Moving to intercept. Airstrike inbound. Within minutes, P-47s dive from the clouds, strafing the retreating column. Artillery pounds the crossroads. Shermans converge from 3 sides, guided by nothing more than voices crackling through headsets. For the Germans, it is annihilation. Their armor superiority means nothing when their forces are blind and scattered. By the time the Allies reached Paris, German tankers knew the truth: the Sherman was not weak. It was relentless. Not because of its armor or gun, but because of its unity. German diaries from late 1944 echo the same fear. Their tanks are everywhere. You knock out one, and 5 more arrive. They move as if directed by one mind. As the Allies crossed the Rhine and stormed into Germany itself, the radios became the ultimate symbol of American might. In towns and villages, Shermans advanced street by street, calling in artillery on stubborn strongpoints, coordinating with infantry at every corner. For German tankers, it was the end. No matter how powerful their machines, they were fighting blind against an enemy that was never alone. By spring 1945, the once feared Panzer divisions were shadows. The Tiger and Panther, marvels of engineering, were reduced to prey. And the humble Sherman, mocked at the war's beginning, rolled triumphantly into Germany, not because it was the best tank, but because it was the best connected. And that is the hidden story of the Sherman's radios, the invisible weapon that shattered German confidence, broke their armored spearhead, and turned American tanks into an unstoppable force. In the end, the story of the Sherman tank is not just about armor or firepower. It is about connection. German engineers built masterpieces of steel, the Tiger, the Panther, machines that terrified Allied crews. Their guns cracked like thunder, their armor shrugged off shells. On paper, they were invincible. But they fought as lone hunters. Blind. Deaf. Isolated. The Sherman was different. Each one carried an invisible lifeline, 181 pounds of radio equipment that transformed steel and gears into something far greater. A single Sherman was vulnerable. 50 Shermans, linked by radio, became unstoppable. That was the secret the Germans never understood. They thought they were fighting tanks. In reality, they were fighting a network. From the burning sands of Tunisia, to the hedgerows of Normandy, to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and finally across the Rhine into Germany itself, the pattern repeated. Wherever American Shermans went, they moved with uncanny precision, striking like a coordinated swarm while German armor floundered in confusion. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel would later admit at Germany's surrender, "We built better tanks. But you made them work together." Whether he spoke those words or not, they capture the truth. The radio, not the gun, not the armor, was the Sherman's greatest weapon. It gave ordinary crews extraordinary power. A young gunner from Kansas could warn another tank miles away about a hidden ambush. A platoon cut off in a French village could call for artillery that arrived within minutes. A commander who had never seen his comrades before could coordinate flawlessly with them in the chaos of battle. For the Americans, it meant never being alone. For the Germans, it meant fighting ghosts that always seemed to know their next move. The electromagnetic waves of the SCR-508 and its siblings were invisible, but they shaped the battlefield more decisively than any visible weapon. They carried not just orders, but survival, victory, and ultimately, the future of modern warfare. Because in the end, this was more than a technological edge. It was the dawn of something new. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a node in history's first digital battlefield network. And from that moment on, war would never be the same. The connected would always defeat the isolated. The network would always defeat the platform. The Sherman's radios proved a timeless truth: in battle, as in life, connection is strength, and isolation is defeat.